The Adeptus Mechanicus are the guardians of the Imperium's fading technology, and custodians of secrets deemed too dangerous or corrupting for the eyes of lesser men. They are stewards of terrifying mechanical might. And now it is time to bring these weapons to bear, so all may know the greatness of the Omniscion. Hello there everyone, it is time to talk about the mighty warships of the Adeptus Mechanicus and what they have to offer for Battlefleet Gothic Armada 2. For right off the bat, the good majority of their fleet is exactly comparable to that of the Imperial Navy, almost 1-to-1, as their cruisers and light cruisers are basically the carbon copy versions of those type of ships. What is different about them though is that their cruisers and battleships, instead of torpedoes, are all exclusively armed with Nova cannons, as well as additional point defense and lances as per their basic stat lines. They also have a lot of other traits going on along with them, for their emergency repair has been augmented and enhanced to also immediately regenerate portions of their shields, as well as massively improving their maneuver gauge for their all-head full and high energy turns. This gives the Adeptus Mechanicus the ability to do the one thing you wouldn't normally think of for a slower and not as very nimble fleet, which is keeping their long range distance and harassing targets at long range, which is exactly how the Adeptus Mechanicus are going to be playing for the majority of their battles. For their accuracy for any of their macro weaponry has been improved to the exceptional accuracy type of scale, which basically reduces the fall off for every 4,500 units of range that you're shooting at by 15%, as opposed to, say, for comparison's sake, the Imperial Navy's falling off at 20% for each interval. And while this may not seem very significant at first, when you include things like lock-on or reload to greatly increase the accuracy or the amount of shots that you're going to be having throughout the course of a battle, this makes them far more effective at range. And it's kind of warranted due to the fact that the Adeptus Mechanicus have lower morale, lower bravery, so when you do get in the thick of the fighting eventually, your ships are likely to break a lot more quicker than that of the Imperial Navies. Never mind their crew complement and their crew capacity is a lot more weaker than that of the Imperial Navy as well, so you are wanting to keep distance for a myriad of reasons outside of the fact that you have Nova cannons and the range and accuracy to justify it. But even though you want to keep your distance, you still have the same firepower of that of the Imperial Navy. The trick will be ultimately making full use of their Nova cannons, which is augmented even further by the addition of the Eye of the Omniscion. Every single ship that has a Nova cannon is also going to have access to this ability, which allows you to basically generate stasis bombs at will by dropping down another kind of variant of the Nova cannon shot. It slows every ship that's in the race by 75%, and this lasts a good full 30 seconds. The amount of time that you need for this Eye of the Omniscion is going to be essential for allowing you to boost out, keep your distance, or even just to disengage from an opponent outright. If for situations like where they try and dive bomb you, like the Drukari's Wraithbone shift or the Ashuriani when they try and do their torpedo runs upon you, if you're not in a good engagement to kind of put pressure on them, you can easily use the Eye of the Omniscion as a means to keep distance and allow you to evade. While technically that may not be the best strategy in that specific circumstances, it is no doubt possible for you to keep that distance. It is, however, limited to the 90-degree prow arc of your Nova cannon, so it's not as convenient as your stasis bomb skill would be. So a lot of the times what you want to try and do is to have your cruisers and battleships separate from each other, so at least that way it's very simple and very easy for you to drop a Nova cannon or an Omniscion shot on your opponent while you don't have to turn around any of the ships that are being pursued currently, burning valuable combustion gauge or even time to just get yourself turned around. As a note, shooting the Nova cannon in any form will make your ship completely immobile for the 10-second channel that's required to fire the shot. They are of course more expensive than that of the Imperial Navy, if by a small margin, due to the additional point defense and the lances that are on top of them. And these lances are potent. They are far more powerful than that of the Imperial Navy, and normally you would only see these type of lances on a battlecruiser or above for the Imperial Navy fleet. However, as a consequence of their cruisers also having these lances, the Adeptus Mechanicus do not have access to any battlecruisers or grand cruisers of any size to allow a little more flexibility. You are a lot of the times going to be relegated to either 5 cruisers, to get the maximum amount of Nova Cannon shots you can for your fleet, or you're going to be including Arc Mechanicus, and that will normally restrict you to 4 Nova Cannons total if you choose to go that route. However, their light cruisers are incredibly affordable, and the amount of escort ships you have access to is astounding. You have every single frigate that are available to all of the Imperium, which includes the Space Marines Nova, Gladius, and Hunter, as well as all the other frigates that you know from the Imperial Navy. You have every single ship to customize towards what type of style you're going for, whether it be the sheer speed and durability of the Nova, or the raw firepower of a sword or Gladius. The Nova Cannon itself is an incredibly potent weapon, it goes without saying. The ultimate problem you're going to have with the Nova Cannons early on is the fact that a lot of opponents can very easily dodge the Nova Cannons in small clumps. If you were to attempt to brute force your way to doing damage, you could fire all your Nova Cannons at once and get some hits that way. However, you will leave yourself incredibly susceptible to running out of firepower really quickly, as your macro cannons alone are not going to be able to get you victory if your Nova Cannons do not strike true. So a lot of the times you need to set up your Nova Cannon shots either with the Eye of the Omnisign itself, or destroying an engine, or using your skills like the Stasis Bomb to kind of prime them for the attacks. For even shields on the majority of the factions is incredibly efficient at negating the Nova Cannon itself. Cruisers and battleships easily have over 400 health of their shields, with the exception of orcs and a few other ships like the light cruisers themselves, so you easily are going to need multiple Nova Cannons just to get through the shields themselves. And thankfully, the long range of your lances and some of your macro cannons, with the Tyrant and Arc Mechanicus, can help to soften up these shields ahead of time without compromising your position. However, your Dictator, Lunar, and Gothic cruisers are a lot more restricted on how far they can shoot. So you would need other means to get those chain hits in to do the permanent damage necessary, and the Eye of the Omnisign Stasis Bomb is primarily the route you want to go. As you start getting critical hits with your lances and your macro cannons, keep in mind you do have a very respectable chance of getting critical hits with the lock-on stance. For each one of your lance turrets on the cruisers is 18% critical hit chance, and the Arc Mechanicus itself has a whopping 45% chance to critically hit a target. And while this may not seem significant against a battleship, it leaves you a lot of leniency to try and cripple the cruisers and light cruisers that are surrounding and supporting said battleship, as the resistance to critical hit is drastically reduced compared to that of a battleship. So if you can get the critical hits early on, which is definitely very possible in the early offsets of a battle, you can then follow it up with a vicious array of Nova Cannons and potentially just immediately destroy any poor vessel that loses its engines at inconvenient times. You do have to be careful about overcommitting too much when you see this happen, for an easy emergency repair on temporary damaged components can easily backfire with these attempts, and even a micro warp jump on, say, the flagship can bait you into firing more shots than you need. And a lot of times that's what your opponent will want to try and do, unless they are built for close range engagements like the Tyranids and Orcs. They will want to burn out your Nova Cannons so that way they're free to just harass you at range, especially if you are relying heavily on your macro cannons to do damage. And even if your opponent's playing the evasive kiting route like that of the Eldari factions, you have intimidating firepower, and this makes it really convenient even for you to use your Nova Cannons upon them. For if you're trying to harass and keep distance from them, you're not always having your prow facing towards the opponent, which is a lot of the reason, again, why you want to have your cruisers spread out, at least in multiple groups. But if you're chasing towards them, this is not a problem anymore. You can save your combustion gauge strictly to pursuing and chasing them down. And if they ever use their Wraithbone Shift or any of their mobility skills that are on a cooldown, it follows up really nicely for those chain Nova Cannon shots to force additional response or force the damage upon them. But if they have things like the combustion gauge like that of the Tau and Imperium factions, then you will have a difficult time knowing when they burn up all their combustion gauge to just to fire your Nova Cannons without setting it up. So just for safety's sake in those regards at least, you will want to make sure you have the Eye of the Omnisign or Stasis Bomb to at least before you commit to anything. And while the Adeptus Mechanicus do have additional point defense to them, which makes them really damn effective at shooting down torpedoes, at the end of the day, due to the increased cost of all your ships, it basically will just balance out towards the missing cruisers that you would not have access to if you were utilizing an Imperial Navy fleet. It allows it to be more focused, which does help tremendously at shooting down fighters and torpedoes like I already mentioned, but however, the frigates themselves do not benefit from these additional point defense. You will a lot of the time be trying to keep your distance and soften up your opponent with the eventual chance of getting the engine critical hits you want on your opponents. And then as you start crippling off your ships, then you are going to want to get in close and engage. Although, being aware of where your opponent's strongest, like the perfect example like Chaos Fleet that's using macro cannons as opposed to lances, change that dynamic tremendously. Or if they're utilizing lances, getting a little more closer to increase the accuracy of your macro cannons, never mind open up the possibility of doing ramming damage, is definitely warranted. But if you are facing off against heavy macro cannon weaponry, taking advantage of your superior accuracy and the devastating potential of the Nova cannons is far more warranted until you start getting those initial kills at least. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the fleet I've been utilizing, and like I said already, there is not a lot of wiggle room towards what kind of fleet you can make with the Adeptus Mechanicus. So this would be pretty close to a generic style type of fleet with an Arc Mechanicus, 3 Tyrant Cruisers, and a Defiance Light Cruiser, mixed in with 2 Novas, which originally when I start off doing my videos of the Adeptus Mechanicus, I had 3 Cobras to supplement the escort ships for fission. And normally the big question is why not go with 5 cruisers and 5 Nova cannons? Well, I hinted at already how the critical hit resistance is a lot more significant or a lot better for the battleships, and any type of fleet that relies heavily on long range harassment, you want to minimize that chance of suffering from early critical hits as much as possible. It allows you to continue on with your harassment and kiting maneuvers, and never mind the fact that it's kind of heavily needed for when you want to get in close aggressively as well, and the Arc Mechanicus serves that role amazingly. Especially when you combo it with the fact that it has the 800 health at such a long range, lances are going to take an eternity to get through the shields, and if you ever equip yourself with the supercharged Void Shield, you can rapidly bring those shields back up at a very consistent basis. You give your opponent very small windows to even get a chance at critical hits if they are going to commit to a longer range route, or maybe you've been really damn effective at keeping them distant due to the effective use that the Eye of the Omnisign can provide. Of course, in my matches that I did on YouTube, the Eye of the Omnisign, I deliberately overshoot the shot, mainly for the intent of them not trying to boost out past the blast radius itself. And even though I miss out on the opportunity to follow up with the Nova Cannon shot itself the majority of the time, the 30-second duration slow and the fact that the opponent is forced to go around it functions almost in the exact manner I use the stasis bomb for when I'm playing a long range type of harassment fleet. And I rely a lot more on my stasis bomb itself and engine critical hits primarily to get the Nova Cannon salvos I want. And I almost always separate these into groups of 2 with a single Tyrant and the Defiance paired up with the Arc Mechanicus, and another 2 Tyrants at least a fair distance away, as you have a 6,000 unit minimum range that you have to deal with, which can be incredibly awkward and very difficult to utilize your Nova Cannon shots for if you have your fleet clumped up too tightly. So just having a second group spread a little bit helps a lot in that matter and provides a very essential support fire for your fleet, even if it is indirect type of fire. And then a lot of the time I use the macro cannons and lances to just slowly start chipping them down and doing the damage. And for situations where I'm facing off against a very fragile fleet like that of the Eldari, or a heavily crippled and damaged Chaos fleet, I will use Arc Mechanicus in a very aggressive manner with the Micro Warp Jump. For the Arc Mechanicus is one of the only ships of the Adeptus Mechanicus fleets that's still equipped with a spur that the Imperial Navy utilizes heavily, and this is a heavily underrated ability that can be used to great effect. The additional ramming damage on top of your heavy prow armor and the sheer amount of hit points you have on this battleship can rapidly kill something quickly if you already brought it down to about half health or a third of its health. And against any type of Eldari factions, especially if they are the Corsairs or Drukhari, This is an immediate death sentence, for once you push them aside and leave them open to your vicious broadside attack, it is very painful and they are going to feel it in a hurry. However, due to the low troop complement and the low morale, you almost exclusively always want to keep your distance otherwise. It's almost to the point where you almost want to forfeit boarding your opponent in general, since you're only going to be doing 1 point of troop damage unless you want to get rid of a very troublesome frigate or light cruiser that could be causing issues for a few. It is almost never worth it to try and board a cruiser or even the flagship a lot of the times, for you only have a 10% chance to actually get a critical hit on them. So just that fact alone is very unreliable. So the only type of boarding I ever really do with the Adeptus Mechanicus is with the flagship when it has a Kulexis Assassin for the 500 points of morale damage. Otherwise, I almost save that specifically for the troop transfer ability the majority of the times. But when you are utilizing the Nova Cannons to full effect, they are going to be a very powerful weapon in your arsenal, while Chaos being a good comparison for a long range type of engagement compared to capabilities of Adeptus Mechanicus. Chaos have the better numbers in a lot of situations, the better type of amount of weaponry to bear, but they don't have the raw burst damage and the ability to immediately destroy a cruiser that the Adeptus Mechanicus has with the amount of Nova Cannons that they bring to bear. And when you combo that with effective use of the Eye of the Omnisign to serve as area denial for certain locations that you don't want them to go to, or even to keep them from getting close in the situations you're face off with a close range macro cannon fleet, Mechanicus have a lot of tricks up their sleeve. But since you rely heavily on crippling your opponent to get those guaranteed Nova Cannon shots, it's like I hinted at earlier, you kind of want to avoid the flagship or at least the battleships if at all possible, and then set yourself up for destroying the smaller portions of the fleet piecemeal, even going so far as to prioritizing the light cruisers, as you can take care of them incredibly quickly due to them having no critical hit resistance at all. But normally you want to focus on either the cruisers or perhaps any battle cruisers that are at least the cheaper end of the scale, as there's a lot more likeliness to destroy their engines that way. Now to go over all the skills and upgrades to look into for the Adeptus Mechanicus, the interesting thing to note with the Mechanicus is that almost all of their skills can be useful in certain fleet circumstances, and with the convenience of being able to switch these skills out at will during your deployment phase, you will find a use for these for almost every single one of them. So I'm going to focus a lot of these on the Mechanicus unique type of skills, and not so much on the generic ones otherwise. The Rad Tempest device is basically the Adeptus Mechanicus version of the Maelstrom that the Corsairs and Azuriani have access to. It synergizes amazingly well with your ability to slow down your opponent, and if you can somehow get them in an Eye of the Omnisign, which its blast will last for about 30 seconds time, you can almost guarantee do 600 points of damage to whatever ship's stuck in there, just for the 30-second duration alone. And this will ignore the armor, this will ignore the shields. It's a great way to soften up a ship, and never mind the fact that the Nova Cannons will almost guarantee the destruction of anything that's caught inside. The Cybernetica Orb, this is the similar type of ability that the Necrons have to bear with the Tesseract Bolt, but this is a damn useful ability due to the fact that it has a really short cooldown of 60 seconds and unlimited charges to bear. However, you're not going to get reliable damage from this due to his slow travel speed unless you're within 4,500 unit range. But if you suspect your opponent's going to be playing a very aggressive type of game, and you can use the Eye of the Omnisign to disengage safely, you will have multiple shots throughout the course of a battle where these will hit, and potentially hit multiple ships depending on how aggressive they're being. So this damage will add up over time, but the main appeal is the unlimited charges and how often you can use this weapon. The Mecha Dominator is a truly original type of ability in that it requires a certain condition to actually make use of this skill, and that simply put is to damage or destroy an enemy ship's deck. And a lot of the times it's going to be very tricky to take advantage of, as since you're going to rely a lot on your kiting strategy to either pursue a ship or at least keep your distance, you are going to be focusing on the engine primarily, almost exclusively. But there could be an argument to be said for fleets that have very expensive type of ships like the Necrons and the Space Marines, whereas even though their battleships are going to be incredibly unreliable to destroy their decks for such an ability, you do have the opportunity to cripple the deck of the cruisers and battle cruisers at a very respectable rate. And they pretty much would have the points to justify you using the ability, as it would completely lock them out of that ship for almost a full 30 seconds, unless they somehow have access to encouraging speech or uses the rally ability on the flagship. And even then, if you can follow it up well with heavy morale damage from either the Novacans or even the Kulexus Assassin, then you're primed to just immediately get rid of the ship thereafter. And even then, most ships will have burnt and emergency repair to deal with damaged components, especially if you hit the engine earlier, so that is not really necessary either way. And while the skills of all of the Adeptus Mechanicus are all fairly useful in specific circumstances, the upgrades themselves are a little more restricted to a small handful of abilities. The Kulexus Assassin, I talked about this multiple times already, and it's warranted, for if you are face off against the orcs or anything that has low bravery, low morale to their crew, you can almost single-handedly cause a mutiny on the ship throughout the course of battle. Even just by destroying a single ship and then immediately lightning striking another one will almost assuredly force a mutiny of some kind. And even if they are very resistant, this can do a lot of morale damage still. It may not be as valuable against brave factions, but it's still really damn essential to kind of disorganize and start crippling opposing fleets, as at the very least, if they do get a mutiny, that's still a guaranteed critical hit when they kill off portions of their crew. Armor-piercing ammunition. Unlike the Imperial Navy, where you almost want to use this exclusively in a lot of circumstances, Adeptus Mechanicus are going to have a lot hard time taking advantage of this, due to the fact that it's a little more risk-reward to get in close to justify the use of this ability. Its power is undeniable against anything that has 83 armor, for you're basically doubling the damage of your macro weaponry, but that would only be normally useful against the Space Marines and Necrons. If you're face off against anything else besides maybe orcs, you're probably not shooting at their prow if they're shooting at you at least. The Advanced Void Shield pattern may seem like a bit of an odd upgrade to include for your Adeptus Mechanicus fleet, but since you're going to be trying to fight at range, the accuracy is going to be a lot less significant for macro weaponry, and lance weaponry is really the only reliable way to hit your ships at such a great range. And the one thing to note about this 25 armor is that it does not get mitigated by armor-piercing weapons like the lances. Hell, even any weapon that ignores armor altogether is still going to get its damage reduced by the Void Shield pattern here. However, as all the armor-piercing weapons basically will just ignore shields altogether, with the exception of funny enough, the Novacan itself, you're not going to see a lot of practical value in that, at least. But it still will be useful for long, drawn-out type of fights, and it helps a lot with minimizing the amount of potential critical hits you might suffer throughout the course of battle. Disruption Overcharge. This upgrade currently does not work as it should, but the potential for it is essential, especially when face off against Eldari, and even for Necrons for situations where you don't have the sheer amount of Novacans available to just demolish their ships incredibly quickly due to their lack of shields. But for Eldari factions especially, this will allow you to bring down their holofield eventually, which will allow you to increase the damage of your macro weaponry. And hell, if you're using the Kulexus Assassin any form for those type of matchups, it is essential to bring that down just so you have access to the ability to lightning strike the opponent. The morale damage alone is going to be essential, especially with Chukari and their low bravery trait. The Adeptus Mechanicus have been a very fun experience during my time with them. However, they can very easily get rolled over if utilized poorly. They don't have the numbers to win in straight up fights a lot of the time, and if your opponent is capable enough to dodge the Novacans incredibly well, you will find yourself with very little room to actually do damage to your opponents. Especially if you fail to destroy any of their capital ships throughout the time you've been using your Novacans. So a good amount of patience is required, waiting for those key moments when you know your Novacans are going to connect is going to be key to gain ultimate victory a lot of the times. I thank you all for watching this video, I hope it was helpful, and I will see you on the battlefield.